So as I dive into January of 1916, supply values have gone up for the Brits. Not a lot going on in the reinforcement track this turn. Not even any withdrawals, it looks like. Although, who knows, because I found some Brits that I hadn't been able to find, maybe, or some, I don't know. Dealing with the reinforcement system on this game is just such a pain. Not that it in and of itself is that bad, but all the page turning and everything involved in it, and everything you have to set up to get a turn, not a turn, but to get a month or a year or whatever working. And really, I do it by the month. These months probably take less than an hour, but add on to that maybe a 20%, maybe even 30% tax of flipping through the page to get everything set up for each month. And that all depends. If you're not using the specific units, fine, but it's just so annoying. Anyway, then I was fortunate enough, and hopefully I'll remember when it comes time, to count the French total supply, and they're not over, but they will be next month. And, I ought to probably do that with the Germans, too, because they got a lot here, too. It's possible that they need to do an offensive this month or next month. Everything feels driven by the wrong thing. It's also, there's no ability to stockpile for a real offensive, right? I'm finding myself every couple months having to throw an offensive, rather than being able to really stockpile up and throw that big offensive that I expect to fire off. I'm going to look at the scenarios. I'll come back after that and see if too much supply is in the Allied hands before the historical offensives, because I suspect it will be. Well, looking at the totals of supply available, they're actually pretty low before these offensives, like 90 between all the armies. I think in the 16 offensive for the French. That's well within their boundaries. I don't know, because this doesn't seem to model the reality that I understand, although maybe these little offensives, little minor attacks here and there, things like that did happen, and maybe it's trying to represent that. It doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't feel quite right, but mainly because there's no desire to do that main offensive. There's no desire to do that offensive that, if it does not gain ground, continues. The offensive halts early in this. You don't have the Battle of the Somme type situation where, or Verdun for that matter, that I've seen. But we're also a little early in the game still. Maybe later on, when supply totals are higher, that'll become more possible. At this point, it may be probing attacks, essentially, to see if you can break the line. And if you cannot, it's not worth going on. But my feeling is, even with the higher totals, I'll still do that probing assault. If I don't crack it right away, I'll try to position myself so that I have a reserve of units in the back, with the French especially, or the Brits. So the Germans don't know exactly which hex is going to be hit. They've got an idea of the salient, but if the French are here, they can strike anywhere along this line. If they're down here, they can strike anywhere along here, right? I mean, you can build that reserve up, and it gives some idea of where a force might hit. But there could be a reserve in multiple places, too, because that first reserve moves into the attack initially, strengthening the stacks that are there. The other reserve slides into place. So, I don't know. If the French take the time and effort to do this right, I think they can achieve a certain level of strategic surprise and flexibility that it's almost trivial for the Germans to manage, just because they can leave the zone of control, jump on a train, rail next to the hex they want to attack, jump off the train, and run right into the fight. It's just harder to do with the French, and I find it particularly hard. For example, now, in order to make it through this game, I'm, listening to my news shows while I'm playing. Just because there's so little happening. I've got so little excitement about this going on. But as kind of the same kind of way I do my work, actually, as kind of I'm doing this, but I've got some background that I can kind of focus on at the same time. Well, that works better for me. That's what I used to do with long games. All right. So, the current rule set specifies the Hindenburg line is only built starting the turn after winter ends until the first turn of winter, in which case it's in place at that point. So it's a shorter span than I was afraid. The Germans are beginning to move pieces around in a manner, because they are low on counters for replacements, they have to kind of start hunting and pecking and looking for something that's damaged to fix. So far I'm okay, but this is going to get built up to its -1 because it can't be more than an 8, and there's no way that can be represented as a counter in a single way. You have to have a modifier on it. It can never go up above that. Presumably the English Guard is in the same position. I have no idea, but I just don't know how to deal with them because they're 8s, but they have an 8 in the circle. And, again, they should just disintegrate. And I should just play by the rules and assume it's all correct. Except that enough things have been found with common sense being better than the rules. And then it ends up being changed when it comes to the Silver Edition, which disappeared, of course, from online. But what we're seeing is the German front is being weakened in certain places. Of course, maybe it was weakened here, and maybe those troops that are there could have moved and I forgot about them. Oops, I better try to remember them next turn. The French didn't attack this time. It's just... but they're at the point where it's not just the supplies, but they're actually running out of things to fix as well. They've got a bunch of cav they can fix. They've been building the artillery because I do think artillery is valuable, although I think they have too much of it. But that gives them that flexibility position where they can put artillery on 2 different sectors of the front. They might use artillery to support an English assault. I've got to start preparing. I've started moving some French over into this area, and that kind of telegraphs, hey, it's going to be somewhere around here. Make sure your line's good, because right now you're concentrated up through the bulge area. And, well, that's not going to work if the attack ends up falling, say, here. So the Germans have to be careful, but of course if they build this up, there might be enough forces in this area to make a punch through here instead. And certainly whatever they built up as sort of a reserve to make this attack, they can swing over here to be the follow-up reserve. Because there are a lot of French still on the line over here. That didn't get decreased much. Mainly just everything's been built. But, again, a second pressure for the French to start building. Because having a lot of replacements in the back, yeah, it's a nice follow-up. It means that after your attack takes some losses, you can start repairing them. But it's still slow because you got to swap units in and out because you can only take losses on base-up units as long as they exist in the battle. Which is to say, once you get to a full step loss, then the unit is immune as long as there are other units which can take the damage. So you end up with the damage distributed to a significant amount. You don't end up with units wiped out unless there's a massive hit of damage, which could happen, but it depends on the attack and what's going on. The French hopefully won't be taking that big a hit, but sometimes it can happen in this. All right, well, I'm about halfway through. This is the beginning of the 4th round. Well, here in the 5th turn of January 1916, the French launched a kind of a surprise assault up here in the mountains, or rough territory. It really is mountains. If you look over here, the real mountainous terrain is the more intense mountains, and then we, of course, hit the Alpines up here. This didn't go very far. There was a very slim chance that it would get a breakthrough, but if it did, the effect would be kind of tremendous. It would force a weak German front to recompensate. Might cause a calibration that caused, and it might still, that causes opportunities to open up a little further north along that line. Everything along here is really pretty solid. I looked at, say, the British trying to coordinate an assault at the same time. They want to do one very soon, and they're going to have to. Not so much for supplies, but because they got all their manpower up. So do the French. They've got all their manpower on the line, and so do the Germans, actually. The only thing is there's decent-sized stacks that are off the line are recuperating. Also up here, which... some of that's just reserves, though. The Germans have a real problem, which the French are kind of aware of. I forgot to move this somewhere. I've got nowhere I know to put it. Basically, they don't have troops that need replenishment. They've had to withdraw a lot of troops, so they don't have a tremendously strong line. It's fairly strong. But they also don't have, what they have is pretty much built up. I'm hunting. It takes a long time to find a damaged unit to replace. The hope here was to cause a little bit of a breach. It wasn't a lot of supply points, 7 points. Might end up impacting their ability to conduct more offensives later on. They certainly have enough for this month. The real problem is locality of supply. They had to move their headquarters, so it didn't get any additional supplies. But it has 11 left, enough for another turn, and it can funnel some in, another 10 or so. Well, 10 is its limit. I did forget to spend the German supply, though. That's off the Gade one, and there were just a 4-point unit there. If it's a 5-point unit, you can do it as a 4-point unit because there'll be a round up on the extra point, I guess. I'm not sure. Anyway, that's what we're seeing with the beginning of the offensives in this early 1916 to try and use up the supply points and use up the manpower, because there's really nothing else, The only other thing to do would be to sit around an extra turn before launching it. This seemed like a small cost. Definitely not likely to succeed, but low risk if it fails endeavor. And it could have had a high payoff. I think the French would have needed... See, they were at -3. They would have needed a 5 or a 6 to hit off the table to destroy that location. Well, the real might of the French hammer blow now strikes here. And I actually had to use the core markers because my clumsy fingers were getting to be a problem. I'm going to have to replace them at some point because I'm going to lose track of what's going on the way I take breaks with those in play. They wouldn't be too bad if you're always paying attention. But taking long breaks like I do, they definitely don't work well. But here I've got, an artillery division, which is really 3 brigades there. And there's a French corps, which is 3 big-sized divisions. All that's taken damage as we pushed into this hex. We got some gain. How much advantage is there, really? Well, this is the hex, I think, that the French lost earlier, and they regained it. It was the weak spot where the French could get the most strength. Weak spot because it's not behind a river line, so they only faced a 1-point terrain disadvantage, which is what really helps the defender. The trenches are useful, mainly in terms of you not having to retreat and taking less damage. But there was enough damage to force the German force was completely wiped out if they could stand, therefore they must retreat. And that ended up being a 10-6. The Germans took 10 losses, the French 6. That's the biggie, it's the casualties. Because this doesn't really gain the French a lot. The hexes that is going to be attacked has a fortress in it, so it's not really available for a mobile attack to try to push them out of the way. That would just be too expensive and wouldn't get you anywhere. There's fortresses on, I'm not sure if there's one down there, but there's significant defenses. There's a river line there. This is not going to be a big breakthrough. So the French are going to probably stop there. Did they spend enough? They spent a hell of a lot of supplies on making that little offensive. This is like a minor La Grande Guerre type offensive. I think it did its purpose. It lets me buy another month. I'll have to calculate out to make sure, but I don't have to continue my offensive at this point. And the Germans have some serious problems. I can see that on the table. They do not have the units that need to be repaired. Now, they've added some. They took losses here. Those are going to get replenished. But they're going to lose replacement points because of their limited countermix on replacement points the more I can delay. And that's something I'd like to do. Even though the French have that same problem, they have a huge countermix. Same with the British. The British only problem is next month they get some Canadian replacements, I think, which start causing a problem. And sometime soon we're getting the Anzac forces coming in. So I think this was the grand early winter offensive. This is all it managed. If I had gotten a breakthrough down here, that would have been impressive and allowed me more opportunities. But having it hit here, there's just nothing to win off of that attack. And that was kind of the problem with it. However, when I calculated up the supply costs, I said, yep, that's going to be all there is. Otherwise, I would probably have continued an assault somewhere else along this line. But there's no point anymore. All right, well, yeah, the French are down to where they'll be at 141 supply points at the end of, at the beginning of next month. Oh, I hope I've got that right. They're at 101 right now, and I don't know what the limits are. You know, you gotta, this is the problem. You gotta constantly flip through and find this one thing, this one set of pages that has everything on it that I'm constantly looking up. So, let's see. French points, and I didn't see, Jesus, I saw a regular French replacement rather than, I don't know what I did there. This game really gets to me. All right, supply points. Yeah, they're at 40 per month every turn. See, if I wasn't playing multiple powers, this would be easy, or easier, because if I was the French, I would just say, yeah, I've got 40 until something really big changes. And I could remember that. However, by playing all these different ones, or by playing both sides, essentially, it does become harder to recall that, and my style of play, etc., makes it worse. But anyway, let's see what we have here. So now I have to look up elsewhere, over on this page, what my limits are, which change. Okay, prior to 1918, it's 150. So I've got to keep you, and again, but these numbers change for every power. If you look, the Germany is 200 prior to 17, and then it goes up to 400 until 1918, and then after 1918, if the game goes that far, I guess it can't in this one. Okay, there's no the game just ends when the war historically ended, I suppose. All right, so anyway, what the French ended up doing was pulling back from this assault, preparing for some recuperation. I've broke up that core. I haven't broken up the artillery unit yet. I may keep those botched together because they're less likely to take losses, so they're less annoying. Still, there's a stacking issue, but I don't think I'll have a problem with a big 18 sitting on top of the stack. Having an 18 somewhere underneath, and I see a small stack, it may not. It may cause me to keep looking again and again, so I kind of need the stack size to help me determine. But that French assault ended. We move into the next month, and I get the fun of allocating the stack of reinforcements for that month, along with all the replacement points and all that, which is really kind of the pain in the ass in the game. All right, up it goes.